Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Environmental Dandelion podcast. This is our podcast where we dive into the intersection of business and sustainability. And we're your hosts and the founders of Dandelion Branding, Court, and that's up. And today we are talking to Ben Kimura-Gross, who is the fundraising consultant for impact founders at Negotiating with Goliath. Such a cool business name, by the way.
It's really cool.
And so, Ben, essentially you make sure that impact founders get the best deal for their company when they're negotiating with investors, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you so much for the work that you do and for being here. I guess as we jump into it, what do you think is the most important thing for startup founders to know when they jump into negotiating investors for their company?
Well, first of all, thanks for the question. And also thanks for having me on this podcast on environmental, because I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate what you do as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think there's a whole bunch of misconceptions. For example, there's this misconception that you have to send out 1,000 emails and you get one response and it's going to be the one. Or, like this massive outreach way of doing things and calling it a numbers game. The founders that I've seen raise successfully, some of which I've also interviewed on my podcast, they have a much more structured way and it's much more relationship based. So I think one of the key things that makes those founders successful is that they do their research. So if you're, talking to a deep tech investor and they're interested in you having what they call a moat, meaning a way of protecting yourself from copycats, and you've got patents on the, technology that you've developed, really great, right? There's an alignment. So I guess what you're looking for is alignment between what the investors, what they want, what their mission is, but also some of the criteria, how they invest, and the stuff that you do. If you find that alignment, then reach out to those investors. And that requires a bit of research. And it's worth doing that because it's going to save you a lot of time in the long term. In the negative scenario, I've also worked with a founder who was actually approached by an investor, a very well-known and renowned investor. And this founder had just completed an accelerator, but as part of the package, this investor wanted to sell them an accelerator. It's not an alignment. As part of the investment, and they put a number on it, and it was kind of like an in-kind investment, right? And they said, this is so many $100,000 worth of accelerator, and, then that's not an alignment, right? Between what this founder needs at that point and what the investor can give.
Uh-huh.
So it's really worth checking who you're talking to before you start talking with them. On a positive example, also, I spoke to Julia Bielecka on my podcast, and what she did was super smart. She was looking for angel investors to raise $700K, and she said, I'm going to select the potential angel investors based on whether they can then introduce me to B2B clients. In other words, looking for the extra bit that's more than just money. So sometimes getting the best
deal,
network. Exactly, their network. So sometimes getting the best deal isn't only about the contractual details, which also matter, and I help with term sheets and things like that too. But what it can also really boil down to is what are the added benefits that you're getting. So when she was ready, she reached out to those investors that had, I can't remember exactly how many, 7 or 10 or 12 investors that had funded her with these $700K. And she said, okay, I'm ready for pilot projects. Who can you introduce me to? And she got 100 warm introductions. She said almost 100.
That's fantastic.
That is totally, like, money can't buy you that, So the point is, do your research. That's what I say to founders. It's so worth it. And the other thing is, of course, investors are people. So, that's also, are you talking to somebody who's going to look over your shoulder and be a micromanager? Or are you talking to somebody who's going to be really supportive, et cetera? And that can also cause a lot of, on the positive side, great support, and on the negative side, stress. Mm-hmm. So that's a whole...
know what you're looking for.
Know what you're looking for. Yeah.
And do the research. Would you say also, like, find and talk to other business founders, if you can, of the folks that have been invested in? Like, would you say
Absolutely.
that's part of the research?
And a good VC will tell you, I mean, of course you can find VC investments, angel investments, different types of investment. For example, though, a good VC will tell you, hey, talk to our portfolio companies.
Sure.
Because they want to be transparent. They want you to know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
That's a huge trust builder too, right?
Those are their success stories, likely. Right?
Exactly, yeah. And if they're treating the founders well, then the founders are going to also sing their praises, so even better.
Mm-hmm.
But they can only do that if they actually are treating their founders well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
it becomes very transparent. And I think transparency is one of the big key words besides the whole trust building and relationship building and those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked with Alina, which I know you've talked to her previously as well. And that's one of the biggest things, we've learned before is this is a relationship that you're building. It shouldn't be like a power grab. It's really a back and forth.
Yeah.
Like care, partnership.
And that's also one of the big differences in how it's portrayed in the media sometimes. There's a lot of these kinds of shows on TV that show founders pitching, and then they get difficult questions and they try to deflect them and answer them smartly. And there it's portrayed as a game of wits and in a very transactional manner.
Yeah.
But it's not just transactional. It's relational.
Yeah, but I guess we don't see that. And so the way that we work with a lot of clients that are startups or that will seek investment or have sought or are doing it now. And they're going into this. And I think probably a lot of the folks you work with go into this with this idea, this is a transaction. And it feels very like I'm asking for money. It feels like, my company is being bought. And we've been actually pretty shocked to learn that with impact investment and with folks that are actually doing it for the good of the world, it's completely different. Mm-hmm. And they view it really differently. And shocked and delighted, honestly. Mm-hmm. Really great.
And I guess this whole relational thing also connects with another thing, which is especially in early stage investments. Maybe Series A, Series B will change a little bit, but your pre-seed and your seed investments, the investors know you're just finding your feet. Yes, you've got a plan, but it's not so much about the plan as it is about you as a person. Are you smart, quick to react? Are you a doer? Do you have grit? If your plan doesn't work in one way, can you pivot? Are you flexible enough to pivot in the direction that will allow you to achieve success? So, and I'm sure that, some investors actually have like these criteria that they check founders on, just the team, just the people, how they assess the people, not the plan, not even only the traction that have already gotten, things like that. But if it revolves so much about the quality of the founders as people, it's by definition already relational.
Yeah, you're right.
In the beginning, that's what it is. And if you let that side shine, then that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I really like that. I think that I think that folks put so much pressure on the plan part and the pitch deck and don't even really kind of consider aspects of perhaps their personality or work ethic that might actually be a larger factor in their ability to actually kind of establish these relationships with potential investors. I think,
The thing is, of course, both are important,
Sure.
Like, you need your financial plan and you need a certain level of traction, or at least if you don't have it, then it's going to be more difficult to get investments and things like that. So these things are all not wrong, but my impression is that the people aspect is underappreciated by the founders themselves, how valuable that is, what they bring to the table just as people. Yeah. And that's why I love Alina Klarna keeps popping up in our conversation, but that's why I love what she says about what she calls lived experience. She says she always asks founders about, where do you come from? What's your lived experience? And if the lived experience actually arises as like one of those points of motivation for what they're doing, that gives an investor so much faith. I'll give you an example. I was working with a founder who is designing an app to help relocated professionals. So people who come to a different country as a professional, as let's say a head of HR or whatever it is, right? And 42% or something, like some horrible number, go home after 1 year. It's totally crazy. Now, the founder herself is a woman from India who's been living abroad for a lot of her life. You know, she's been living in Sweden and other countries in Europe. And so she knows what that's like. She knows what it's like to be relocated as a child, right? So as a kid, her parents moved around. I think it had something to do with their jobs. And for her, it's been a positive and empowering and mind-broadening experience, right? And she wants to share that positive side of it. And so she's creating this app to solve this major problem because, of course, for companies also, imagine you have projects. It costs so much money to relocate somebody. So imagine, you know, you spend, I don't know what it is, 40K, 50K on relocating a professional as a company, and you know your failure rate is going to be 2 out of 5. That's horrible.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great example of how lived experience connects to the motivation to do what you're doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of founders actually have that. And it's so worthwhile talking about that, you know, like just saying, this is my background, where I come from. This makes me want to succeed at this startup, at this project.
Yeah. On that note, it's time to ask our favorite question in this show. But before we do that, I want to remind our audience to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any inspiring sustainability talk that we have here on the podcast. So Ben, we want to hear what the role you're playing in the transition to a more sustainable future is and the lived experience that took you there.
Okay. Very good.
We're going there.
We're going there now. Okay. Okay, so my role is fairly simple. You know, the more impact founders get great deals, the more impact succeeds at scale, the better, you know, the world we're going to be living in the future with, you know, sustainability matters, regeneration matters, circularity matters. So along all those fields, I hope to empower as much as I can. That's the answer to question number 1, right? My lived experience. So I grew up with parents and aunts and uncles in Germany who are all really argumentative. And it has, I believe, something also to do with their jobs because, you know, a teacher, a psychologist, a judge, a lawyer, you know, like they're all, we find truth by arguing real hard about stuff, being rhetorically excellent, and then discovering in a very confrontational way what's right.
Yeah.
So I found it quite easy. For example, I lived in Japan for a long time. This is a bit of a tangent, but I lived in Japan for 11 years and I had a job there. One of my jobs was to help shipping companies predict whether, if they were going to court against each other, 2 companies, who would win. You do like a predictive analysis. And so this is what's called pre-trial recommendations.
Okay.
You should go to court, you're going to win, or you shouldn't because you're likely to lose.
Yeah. You're the guy that was like, you should settle.
Yeah. Or I'm the guy who writes the 3-page recommendation plan. You're going to win because blah, 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 right? Give them a detailed outline of exactly all the points why they're going to win. They forward that 3-page recommendation to their counterpart, and the counterpart says, oops, okay, I'll pay that £400,000. No problem. Which is the true intention of what I did. So a friend of mine called that a negotiating with a baseball bat. I mean, not literally, obviously, but, you know, just the style of verbal lines of argument. And that's my background. That's my lived experience. That's the kind of family I grew up. And then, yeah, this is where it gets a bit personal. In my first marriage, I realized that doesn't work. You can't, I mean, you can't out-argue everybody, especially not with a Japanese woman who didn't learn how to argue that way and who's going to really begrudge you being so seemingly superior in your arguments. But arguments are just arguments. Doesn't mean you're right. It just means you're good at arguing. And it really caused a huge shift in my mindset. There was a lot of difficulties involved in trying to figure out, okay, our relationship is going to end. How can we make sure that it doesn't too massively affect our child, et cetera, et cetera? So a lot of personal tough times, but also growth going on during that time. And I created this, I don't know whether I created it, but I went through this major shift of what does it mean to find common ground with people? What is negotiating really all about? And how does it lead to the best positive outcomes? And that was probably the kickoff towards me rethinking, how do great negotiators who aren't always in a position of strength achieve great results with people who might be on like totally opposite side of the fence, right? For example, one of my favorite negotiation stories is Nelson Mandela negotiating with basically a white supremacist general, trying to keep him from starting a bloody riot in South Africa before the votes, because this general, Constant Viljoen, he was saying, if you don't step down as a candidate for the presidency, I've got 55,000 armed militiamen. We're going to start a civil war. How about it? Why don't you step down? And Nelson Mandela invited him for tea. He sat him down. He was kind to him. He was compassionate. He understood this general's fear, actually, of Nelson Mandela. And he worked his way into this guy's heart that when Nelson Mandela resigned, I think after being president of South Africa for 4 or 5 years, this guy, by that time, had learned Nelson Mandela's native tongue, which is Xhosa. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, but had learned Nelson Mandela's native tongue and gave a goodbye speech in Nelson Mandela's native tongue with huge amounts of respect and appreciation for Nelson Mandela. So for me, that's kind of like the epitome of figuring out how to negotiate with somebody who is putting you in a really difficult position. And you don't have the baseball, the baseball bat just wouldn't work in that situation, right? And I'm obviously not talking about a literal baseball bat, but just an argumentative way of negotiating. So, that's what negotiating with Goliath is all about, right? Stop thinking that you're going to be David who's slinging the slingshot and hit Goliath in the eye, and that's the way to go. No, because 99% of the time, David gets trampled. So start negotiating, but know how. How do you negotiate up? And I think startups do that a lot. They have to negotiate up so much.
Yeah. And we spoke before this, and you said that that's your preference. You really like helping people negotiate. And you gave a couple of really good tips in that.
Oh, while we were talking
in
before?
Our call, and
okay.
Well, we were talking before. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you could give your favorite 2 or 3 little.
I remember we were talking about the power of body language in negotiation too, right?
Yeah.
That's a powerful, deep topic. That whole thing of body language and also what we call paraverbal aspects of speaking, which is the sound of your voice, basically, right? The sound, the speed, the melodiousness and things like that. Let's talk about the ask, right? Okay, so as a founder, you're going to make an ask at some point. You're going to say, I need $1 million or whatever it is, right? $1 million, I just picked that out of a hat. Doesn't matter. Let's say it's 350,000 pounds. Yeah. How do you portray confidence when you ask? And this is really tricky because we got video going here too, right? So I'm going to do the physical part too. So what we need is 350,000 pounds. Voice rises, you lean forward a bit, you come across needy. You think you're coming across energetic or engaged, but leaning forward when you're making an ask actually also has that aspect of coming across needy. So you don't want to do that. So you say, well, what we're looking at is an investment of 350,000 pounds. You lean back ever so slightly. And I always say, lean back 7 degrees. Now, 7 degrees is not anything anybody can literally really do. But what it means is, for example, a lot of time you'll be sitting, right? And what I don't want founders to do is lean back and throw their shoulders back and come across kind of, it's like bad acting, exactly like you're doing all. It's just like bad acting. That's the pretense of being relaxed and confident. But if you do it like that, it will always look like a pretense. So literally just leaning back just a touch. Like I'm standing right now, so it's a bit more difficult, but just a touch like that, whatever it is, 7 degrees, 11 degrees, doesn't matter, but and also, of course, let your voice go down at the end of the sentence and slow down a little bit. Those are 2 key factors that show confidence. That's just like a really easy tip. Is that the kind of thing you were going for, Bob?
Yeah. That's really helpful, I think, because though we talked about before, like those little body language things make a really big difference for people.
Yeah.
If you know it, you can just do it.
And it connects to this thing of making the investor feel safe and confident also about investing in you as a person, right? If you're confident, they're going to feel safer. And I think that's another thing that a lot of founders overlook, which is investing, people who are working for VC firms or who are making angel investors, they're all playing quite a high-risk game. And they don't just want you to show them your plan because they don't know where it's going to. They want you to make them feel safe. How does that work?
Yeah. How does it work?
That's a question that I answer in my mastermind. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
There's no short answer to that question. Yeah. It's a little bit more complex.
Yeah.
But there's one thing that you can do definitely always, which is don't deflect their concerns. Take their concerns seriously. I was in a meeting with a founder and an angel investor, very, very wealthy individual once. And this angel investor asked something about the founder's supply chain, and he saw a certain risk in certain aspects of the supply chain. And the founder said, "No, I've got it covered. It's all good." That was the end of the conversation. I mean, the conversation went on after that, but that was, I could see the investor's face go like, okay, I'm not interested anymore. Because if you have a concern and it's not being taken seriously, you don't feel safe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Why would they just randomly trust someone that says, "Oh, I have it covered"?
Exactly. Yeah. And
then doesn't elaborate.
Exactly. But the thing is, and the founder was able to elaborate a little bit, and was able to also make some arguments, but now you're arguing. Yeah. And there's this famous quote, you can't win an argument. If you lose, you lose. And if you win, you lose. I love that quote.
So how to make it not an argument.
Exactly. And the only way to make it not an argument is to take their concerns seriously. So I think it takes a certain kind of willingness to be vulnerable, but that's exactly how you build trust too, which is showing vulnerability, right? So it all connects back into the relationship building, trust, and that makes them feel safe. So always take their concerns seriously.
Blessing.
Really good advice.
And maybe ask them for advice. What would they do to, help overcome the thing that they're concerned about? Now you've got them engaged. Now you've got them thinking on your behalf.
Yeah, because I think founders go into it with I need to have all of the answers. And as you're saying, yeah, you can't have all the answers. So that vulnerability of saying, I think I have an answer, here's an idea, but how would you approach it? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow, I think I could ask a lot more questions. You kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, the biggest misconception around negotiation in this world. Can you elaborate on it a little bit and how storytelling can make a dent or change that misconception?
Sure. Actually, I love that question, so thank you. There's loads of misconceptions, but one of the misconceptions is that it's all transactional and it's not relational. And I would say it's deeply relational. And it's also about building trust. So how can storytelling help? Know how to tell your origin story, your lived experience very well. Even if it creates a bit of vulnerability around who you are. 5 years back, I would have never, ever told you the story about my ex and my own part in ruining that relationship, because it's not fun, but it's actually an important part of who I am. And I think I've had founders ask me, look, this is so deeply personal. Can I say this? And I say, you know what? If you have the courage to say it, it's super worth it.
Yeah. Do you think we can change? I mean, I think that you are on this path of kind of single-handedly changing this story around this. Is it transactional? But do you think it's possible to change that conception that it is a transactional relationship on either side of the investor or the startup at a larger scale.
Two things. First of all, definitely not single-handedly. I've met loads of really, really wonderful people, also investors, who absolutely align with, the things that we've been talking about, and who, really focus on that relational aspect in a really meaningful way, not just in a kind of superficial, hey, we're going to be friends, but in a really meaningful way. Yeah. So I see it more as a wave building up to be something really powerful. It's something that's happening. It's something that's becoming a trend, hopefully. And I think I'm super happy to be part of that trend. That's more the way I see it. And also, there's a mixture of transactional and relational components. It's just that the transactional is so overemphasized and the relational doesn't get perceived, even though it's there and it's always going to be there, but it doesn't get perceived as something that a founder can also work towards and use and engage in a meaningful way. So how can we strengthen that? I think there could be a lot more media exposure around this kind of thing about, how founders engage in that way and how investors engage in that way. And I'm sure that's happening with the presence of VCs who are, more working in that direction. I think it naturally aligns with trying to create positive impacts. And what I see as a not helping is some of the TV shows that have names like Shark Tank and whatever, what have you, right? Which make it look like, you're going to get torn apart, and that's not the point. And which create this also fear. I mean, of course, fear creates excitement and that sells and it's a great TV show, but that's, and it's a great TV show for people who aren't actually in this game. But what really helps is there's a podcast, I think it's called Simply the Pitch. I love that podcast. You should listen to it because their approach is much more like the founders come in, they don't have a pitch deck. There's no big presentation type of thing. They get somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes to do like a mini pitch, which is always about telling a good story, right? So there's that storytelling aspect to it, which is part of your strength, obviously, at Dandelion. And then they start engaging in a conversation. And that's exactly what it's all about, right? And I would say somewhere between 75 to 90% of the podcast is conversational, which is, that's natural human behavior, right? To talk to each other, ask each other questions, answer them honestly, show some vulnerability. That's where the real relationships are being built. And so that's why I love that podcast. And in fact, that's over in America. I'd love to start something like that in Germany. That would be exciting. That's another story.
That would be really cool. Speaking of pitches, we're a little bit out of time. I definitely want more, but where can people find you? Is there anything you want to pitch? You mentioned your masterclass. So yeah.
They can find me on LinkedIn, via email. Maybe you can share that in the show notes. And, of course, also on my website, which is negotiating-with-Goliath.com. Okay, so negotiating-with-Goliath.com with hyphens in between. And what I'd like to really share and what I'd like to pitch is early next year, early 2025, I'm going to be starting my new mastermind. And it's a small group, maximum of 6 people. And we dive down into how to do a very smart, fast investor outreach with the goal of obviously raising the funds that your startup needs at this point, which could be anywhere between, 150K to 1.5 million, right? I deal with various levels and stages, and the groups are wonderful. That's the thing that I'm so happy about, is because, we create exactly this kind of collaborative mindset. And then suddenly person A says, hey, by the way, I know this investor over here. He's not in my sector, but he's in yours. Can I introduce you? And this multiplying force is crazy in these kinds of groups. And I think that's another way that impact founders can really make fundraising easier, is to join these kinds of groups, whether it's my mastermind or somebody else's, right? But to join these kinds of groups where you act as one and you share your pool of knowledge and connections and networks and stuff like that.
I love that. The power of community.
Right.
Things like that. That's amazing.
Wonderful.
Wow.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was a wonderful podcast. And thank you for getting really vulnerable here. Right. Truly appreciate that and telling your story.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
Great.
Looking forward to listening to many more of your upcoming episodes too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for watching. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.